and welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 4 of my series where I'm comparing infinite painter brushes to traditional art tools. And in this video we're going to look at the spray and the watercolor categories. I'm using Infinite Painter for Android, but these brushes are available on iOS. So we're going to start with the spray category, and that means an airbrush. And we have several different types of brushes for the spray brushes, and the smoother brushes are usually the Murano and the Banksy brushes. And as you can see, they have a smoother spray. And then they get a little bit grainier as you go along, and the Kilroy, the Fail, the Inky, those brushes are all a little bit grainier looking, and you can make them look grainier too if you change the texture on them as well. And then you go ahead and you can try the Thierry brush, and it's kind of a cloudier look. It's not so grainy looking. And then there's the splattery looking brushes, and that's the Dexter and the Haze brushes. And the Dexter is kind of like a paint splatter, and then the Haze is sort of like a toothbrush splatter. You can adjust it and make it look more like a toothbrush look, or just however you want to do it. And as you can see, when you go in here and change the texture on the Dexter brush, it will actually show the texture of the paper, and you can just play around with that and import your own papers or whatever you want to do there, and it just kind of gives it a neat look, and it does actually respond to the different textures that you use. Then you can just hit the reset button if you want to go back to the original paint splatter look. And it's very nice to use for backgrounds or flowers or any kind of foliage even. And then here's an example of some of the paintings I've done using the spray brush category. You can use it for smoke, for fog. You can also use it for special light glow at night in your paintings. And then the next category I want to look at is watercolor. And as you can see, there's lots of different kinds of watercolor. There's even gouache, and you can make acrylic look like watercolor, and you can do all these effects in Infinite Painter too. So the first brush that we're looking at is the Turner brush, and it's kind of got jagged edges on it. And you can use it for water and things like that. And then Monet brush also has jagged edges on it. Then the smoother brushes are the Winslow brush and the Marin brush, and you can adjust the texture with these. And watercolor paper comes in hot press, cold press, and rough press paper, and hot press is smooth, cold is rough, and rougher is the roughest surface. And you can even scan in your own papers if you don't find the texture that you like in Infinite Painter. And as you can see, this brush is responding to the texture, and this is the Marin brush. And then the Brandt brush has more splotches and is probably more suitable to do trees and bushes or just rougher textures. Then we have the Blake brush, and it's kind of like short strokes that you would make with a brush, and I use those for leaves and things like that. The Lorraine brush, I like it a lot because it gives me a foliage texture. And then the Hopper brush is kind of like your toothbrush spray. You can use it for gravel and rocks and things like that. And you can go in there and you can adjust the amount of flow on your brush. You can adjust how close the particles are together. And you can make it look like gravel that's really thick, or you can just make it, you can really scatter it and make it look really sparse and use it for flowers even. You can use it for like distant flowers. You would use that for distant flowers in a field. And then here's how it is when you reset it. And you can make the particles bigger. You can use it for bubbles even, maybe, or even rocks, kind of, if you sort of hide the roundness of the brush. So it's a really versatile brush, and it's one that I use a lot. And then you can go ahead and just kind of play around with it and see what all you can do with it. And you can go in here and play around with the settings on these brushes, and you can turn the watercolor setting off. And when you do that, it looks more like the airbrush, the spray brush categories. It's not quite as thin, it's more opaque. And it probably gives you more of a gouache-like texture, or kind of maybe even acrylic, but mainly more like a gouache-like. And as you can see, what it looks like, it's transparent with the watercolor setting on, and it's thicker with it off. And then here I wanted to show you just a little picture of how you can make things look like watercolor. And so I got a Lighthouse picture from pixabay.com, which has royalty-free photos for references. And I'm using the maroon brush for the sky here, because it gives a pretty smooth wash. And you just, as long as you hold your brush down, it won't actually look like a layer, but you can just go ahead and smooth it out if you want to by going back to the spray category and selecting the Mirondo brush on your blending, and that will kind of give you a smooth blend, and it makes it look like a smooth watercolor wash. And then I'm just adding a little bit of color to the sky to suggest some clouds there. And again, you can just smooth it in if you like with the spray brush category. And then here I'm using the pencil just to sketch in the lighthouse and the bushes and all the things around it. And probably, you know, if you're working traditionally, you would probably do the sketch first and then do the wash over it, but you can do it either way. I mean, if you wanted to do the background wash first, you can. And I don't mind that the lighthouse looks blue, because it's going to be kind of the shadow color. And it's a reflection of the sky anyway in the photo. As you can see, the shadow color is sort of a light blue. So we don't mind that wash for the house and the lighthouse. And so then you can just go ahead and start working on the sand color here. Just pick kind of a yellow ochre or burnt umber, burnt sienna maybe, just some browns, some really light browns. Probably raw sienna would be the best colors if you're following along traditionally. And as you can see, you get a pretty good watercolor look just using the maroon brush, and you can use all the other ones if you want to and just get kind of a dirt-like look there. And then I'm using the Lorraine brush for the foliage here on the trees. And you can just go ahead and start with light and work into dark, just like you do with watercolor if you want to. Now, the advantage of digital is that you can actually cover up your watercolor work. And so it is a little bit better in that you don't have to work exactly the same way. But you can if you want to. And here I'm just kind of playing around with the brushes there, the Blake brush, just trying to get kind of a grass-like or bushy texture here. And you just can play around with the settings and just see, you know, the different looks that it gives you, and see if that matches what you want for grass and texture. And then I go back and forth between the Lorraine brush just to add leaves onto the trees. And as you can see, the lighter color is actually covering up the darker color, and that's one of the advantages of digital over traditional painting. But you can also do that with gouache or acrylic if you want to add that to your painting. You just have to make sure that you don't lose that transparent look. And then here I'm just adding a little bit of the dark back, and then I'm using the Marin brush to add a little bit of darker shadow to the lighthouse here and under the house, under the porch here on the shadowed side. And then I went ahead and added a little bit of a dark red. And here I switched off the watercolor function for a minute because I want it to look more like a gouache or just watercolor with not very much water in it. And so you can toggle that switch on and off all the time just to get a thicker watercolor look or a gouache look here. And I'm working on the roof here with it turned off just to get a thicker look and a smoother look as well. And it just kind of gives you a soft edge, but it is an awful lot like gouache more maybe than just regular watercolor. But that's one of the advantages of Infinite Painter, is that little toggle switch where you can turn the watercolor effects on and off. It's actually quite neat, and it helps you a lot with your painting to get different effects. And then here I'm just kind of working on the details of the lighthouse, and you can make the brush really small and do the details like you would take a really small round brush if you were doing this traditionally, and just paint in the details as well. And you would have to do it with darker colors so that it would show up. And here I'm just adding in the black to the top of the lighthouse and all the little details that are on it, the railing around it, the light. You can kind of see the structure of the light inside it even though it's not on. Adding the windows and the doors to the cottage that's next to the lighthouse. And you can just go ahead and add more foliage with the Lorraine brush here. That's what I'm doing. And the Brandt brush also works pretty good for foliage. It depends on what kind of trees that you have there. And I'm kind of playing around with it and trying to get kind of a bushy look as well, and sort of a seagrass type of look there. And then you can use the Marin brush to smooth the pathway a little bit, add shadows to the pathway. And then here I went ahead and I saved it, but something went wrong and I lost the project, and I didn't export it out like you should do. You should export every stage out, and the phone rang and I didn't get that done. So I lost it, but I was able to take a screenshot of my recording, and so I got most of it. It's kind of cropped because I couldn't get all of it because the photo reference was in the way, but I managed to get most of my picture back, and then I imported it in and did the same texture so that I would get the same effects with the brush. And so I went ahead and just kind of finished it out, trying to put in more grass here. And I'm using the Marin brush again, and turning off the watercolor switch makes it thicker and more opaque and gives it a better grass-like look here. And then you can go ahead and sort of blend the pathway in a little bit with the spray brushes. And you would do this traditionally, of course, with more water and immediately as you put it down. And then here I'm using the hopper brush for a little bit of gravel texture there. And it really works quite well and gives it a little bit of a sandy look and sandy texture. And then I'm just working on the trees a little bit more and the grass, trying to get a little bit more structure here. And it works best when you turn the watercolor effects off. The grass, to make the grass and the branches on the trees here. And then I'm just kind of playing around and adding a little bit more color. And you could do this traditionally because that's a darker color. So I'm using the Brandt brush to add a little bit more of a darker color to the grass and the bushes around. And just kind of make the edges of the foliage a little bit more jagged looking. and just adding a little bit more texture to the grass there and the seagrass. And then I used the what you call it, marine brush, I guess, to add in the shadows again, because it's smoother. So I like to use that brush a lot to add in more shadows. And then here I'm working on the details a little. And what I like to do sometimes is switch to the ink category and just add the details more with ink. And I do this working traditionally too, because I just love pen and ink. But here I thought I wanted it to mostly look watercolor, so I'm just barely using a little bit of ink in certain places. I don't want it to be overpowering, because I kind of want this just to have more of a plain watercolor look. But you can add a little bit to the texture there, and to the grass, to the lighthouse, to the cottage, and just use it to sign your name if you want to as well. And then I just went ahead and added a little bit more detail to the top of the cottage, and then I saved it this time and I exported it out. And that's what you need to do, is export all your stages out of the painting, so that when something like that happens and you lose your project, you're not in trouble. Now here's some examples of watercolors that I've done in the past. In this picture I used the inks as well as the watercolors, and I also did that in the next one of the mittens in Arizona, and I did that in this cat fairy picture as well, but I mostly used watercolor for it. And then here I just used the watercolor for the background, and then you use sort of colored pencils and more of an acrylic look in the mask painting. So this is the end of part 4 of my comparison to infinite painter brushes to traditional art tools. And in the next video I'm going to cover the harmony brushes and all the created brushes and the brushes you can download. So thanks everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments down below, and I will catch you later.